St Saviour's Church at Stydd, Grade 1 listed, and you don't get many of them to the pound, I can tell you. Might look a bit shabby and basic, but that's because it's ancient, and everyone's entitled to look a bit dishevelled when we get older. It was already well established by the time that the Knights Hospitaller in 1265 acquired the building from Adam the chaplain warden of the House of St Saviour. In fact, it was almost certainly a keel once, their 5th century upturned boat chapels, if you didn't already know, judging by the keel cross base that can still be found lying next to it. There's a Roman road not far away with 2 other cross bases recorded on Victorian Ordnance Survey maps in just the right locations to also indicate that there was a keel in the area. The earliest surviving bits of the building, however, apart from the cross base, which doesn't really count as building, are the windows and door in the north wall, dated circa 1190. In 1543, the hamlet of Stydd was sold to Thomas Holt of Grizzlehurst, who only gets a mention here because we like the name Grizzlehurst so much. During the First World War, an archaeological excavation was undertaken at Stydd Church by the staff of Stonyhurst College. Better than getting shot at in the trenches in France, I suppose. They discovered what they believed to be the remains of a Roman temple dedicated to Mithras, which makes sense because keels were often constructed on earlier Mithraic sites. Extensive charring indicated that said temple had been damaged by fire, possibly arson committed by Robert the Bruce, who had a penchant for setting buildings alight back in the 1320s. The records show that in 1501 Nicholas Talbot endowed a priest to sing for 12 months at Stydd Church, where his parents were buried. I bet his throat was hoarse after that. Right, let's have some not very interesting facts then, for those who like their local history over-seasoned with gravitas. By the mid-19th century, the church roof was unsafe and the building covered in ivy. In 1925, there was extensive restoration by Reverend Sidebottom, the rector of Ribchester. The north wall, as already mentioned, has Norman features, 2 narrow windows and a single doorway, with the usual mushroom-induced sawtoothed ornamentation typical of the period on the outside. The porch is a crude addition to the church, dating from the 13th century. High up on the west wall is a doorway which probably once led to a gallery. Are you sufficiently bored yet? That's a shame because there's more. On the south wall there are 2 windows dating from the 15th century. Both were borrowed from St Wilfrid's Church in nearby Ribchester in the 17th century and never returned. Between them is a lancet window, an adaptation of 2 earlier Norman windows inserted to light the pulpit, presumably because the sermons were gloomy enough already. Said lancet window has a bulge in the bottom of it. Once a leper's squint, no doubt. Lucky old lepers, eh, getting a ringside seat like that. The east window above the altar dates from the 13th century. The font was carved from gritstone by some not very talented craftsmen in the early part of the 16th century. Beneath the altar lie the badly damaged tombstones of Sir Adam and Lady Alicia Clithero, dating from 1350. There's also the white marble gravestone of Francis Petre, oddly enough a Catholic priest. It's almost unique for a Catholic bishop to be buried in an Anglican church, but not quite, seeing as the graves of Richard Walmsley and Charles Ingleby also belong to Catholic priests. Father Sir Walter Vavasour was also buried at Stydd in 1740, his grave marked by a long cross just to the right of the altar. Rewinding for a moment, the font with its mildly amusing carvings, well, they're mildly amusing if you're the sort of person who finds Last of the Summer Wine funny, was a gift in the 16th century by Thomas Pemberton, preceptor of Newland, who loved St Saviour's so much that he's buried in Rhodes. Now this is where it starts to get interesting again, possibly. The gravestone at the foot of the stone coffin is believed to belong to St Margaret Clithero. Yes, an actual saint, aka the Pearl of York, who, despite being pregnant, was pressed to death in 1586 for harbouring Jesuits. Yes, I did say pressed to death. She was executed on Good Friday by being laid across a sharp rock, the door from her own house being put on top of her and loaded with rocks until her back broke. Ouch. Entertainment was thin on the ground in those dark times before Anton Deck. Back to the serious stuff again, and on the south wall of the chancel there's a piscina. Its bowl has long since gone and it's now a bit redundant. In fact, it ought to be thrown out, to be honest. The not very far away geographically Catholic Church of St Peter and St Paul was built in 1789. Perhaps as well, really, when you consider what happened to St Margaret Clithero. It's a mark of local tolerance that it was allowed to be built at all, 2 years before the Second Catholic Relief Act, which allowed Roman Catholics to worship again. The fact that there's a Roman Catholic saint buried in St Saviour's is a bit of a giveaway too. The church was designed to resemble a barn to disguise its true purpose, so perhaps they weren't that tolerant. It's not very barn-like, I must be honest. Presumably the cows around Stydd have very luxurious tastes. Nearby stands the Stydd almshouse, built in 1726 by John Sherburn, for the teacher at the Roman Catholic school and for 5 poor old single women professing the Roman Catholic faith. So, swings and roundabouts, eh? Pesner, the architectural historian, described the almshouse as very curious and very engaging. Wouldn't mind being poor enough to live there myself. Better than the Spinney any day. The building is now maintained and let by a local housing association and has a central flight of steps sweeping up to an almost baroque arcade and a curved stone parapet above. Alright, it seems as though we're back to the boring stuff again, so it's probably best if we ended this episode. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you already are subscribed, don't forget to watch these bloody films because, judging by the viewing figures, most of you don't.